Hello and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Friday, the 17th of December. I'm Hugh Stewart, and with me in the studio tonight is my colleague Brian Liddy. And we'll be discussing shortly some of the main points from the week's news and also some stories which have reached us in the Broadcasting Scotland studios today. But first, Brian, I'm going to begin with the coronavirus update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 3,817,740 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 3,029,584 have been confirmed negative, 788,156 have tested positive. There are 4,336 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 7 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,771. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 522 were in hospital last night, 33 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 4,367,798 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination. 3,986,305 have received a second dose, and 2,377,170 have received a third dose or their booster. The latest UK figures show 147,048 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 111 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. So, Brian, we have a reduction in the numbers dying reported for COVID in Scotland, although there's a slight increase in the numbers reported with the infection. What do you think? Does this look like good news, or is it a bit confusing?
Yeah, it's interesting here. I don't know if it's possible to say that it's good news at this stage with the new variant on the loose, but it does seem that it's slowing down, perhaps, and we just hope that maybe that so that the new restrictions that have been announced by the First Minister, perhaps they're beginning to have some effect, but it's too early to say yet, I would say.
Yes, but there is an increased numbers of cases compared to last week, but actually today's increase is not as high as we had earlier on, so perhaps it is beginning to slow down, and that's possibly, as you say, people are paying attention to what the First Minister said in Parliament the other day about the need to be in charge and to control their own behaviour, and also, of course, the continued rollout of the boosters. Scotland has more of its population boosted by percentage than anyone else in the UK. So
yes, the numbers are still upwards, but they're going up more slowly. So hopefully that's because people are beginning to pay more attention and to restrictions and adapt their behaviours.
And again, we'll have to see next week if that trend continues, the trend that the daily increase doesn't seem to be as big. Well, let's hope so. Now, let's turn then to what the First Minister said today. The First Minister held a press conference this afternoon, and she was principally talking about the Omicron variant and its rapid transmission, and of course the measures we can take about it. The First Minister was joined today by the Chief Medical Officer, Gregor Smith. So what points were we made? First of all, the First Minister was really reiterating what she said in Parliament the other day about the measures which are really being brought in. We haven't really got a tightening of restrictions, have we, Brian? But to some extent, we're returning to what we were doing already, weren't we? Like queuing in retail, trying to reduce numbers. So there's nothing new, really. It's back to some of what we were doing before.
Yes, it's not lockdown. The new measures, as you say, it's to carry on. I think one of the things that the First Minister said was we know what to do to stop this virus spreading. It's just a matter of tightening up what we do and going back to things that we had relaxed upon, so things like social distancing, while queuing to get into a supermarket, perhaps, that looks like that might return. Or if you go into a bar, they might have to put back up the perspex screens between the tables. One of the things that struck me was, compared to when the virus first appeared and the First Minister was giving statements, I thought she looked incredibly nervous, verging on frightened, whereas this time it's as if she has learned what needs to be done before. And there was also that, this time she's just saying, we know what we need to do, we just need to do it. And if we do it, then we'll avert lockdowns and we'll be able to still go to the pub and still have a social life. But also, it's as if she knows that the last time when the virus first appeared and she waited to find out what Westminster was doing so she could do something together with Westminster. I think she now knows that there's no time to waste. We're not waiting for Westminster. We're calling for these things now.
Yes, certain measures we can take straight away. As you said, Brian, shops, well, retail premises in general are being told they must take steps to make sure there's plenty of distancing. So 2 metres is back in, and there should be queuing. And as you said, screens. And of course, everyone indoors should be wearing masks and on public transport. But we were doing that already. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the increased case numbers did not seem to have transmitted into increased admissions to hospitals. So we'll hope that continues. One thing the government can't do anything about, though, as the First Minister said, is crowds at football games. Now, in fact, there's going to be 2 big games in Glasgow at the weekend. The Rangers game at Ibrox is expected to have about 50,000 maybe on Saturday, and probably a similar number at Hampden for a cup final on Sunday. Now, I noticed several of the journalists asked the First Minister today, why aren't you taking measures to control football crowds? And she said, well, that means cancelling, and I can't cancel unless we can come up with some compensation for the clubs or presumably for the people who were expecting television revenues. So she's saying, well, maybe we should do that, but we don't have the choice because we don't have control of the money.
Yes, it was a similar point to, I think one of the journalists that asked her later said, why are big bands that have got concerts coming up, why are they having to cancel a concert rather than the government? And I think it was a separate question that said, why are you allowing big football matches to go ahead? And her answer to both questions was she doesn't have the ability to raise money to compensate anybody, these big businesses. The implication was that if she did have the financial levers, she would use them and she would make those decisions. But at the moment, it's reserved, and so she can't do it without money being released by Westminster. So we're doing what we can, which is she's asking us to restrict our own behaviours or modify our own behaviours to control the virus and to keep numbers down. But when it comes to something that costs a lot, such as compensating big football matches that are cancelled or big pop concerts like Deacon Blue, then we need Westminster, and there's a gap there because we don't have that from Westminster yet.
Yes, our hands are tied, and we will come back to Westminster later on.
Yes, and it's worth maybe saying that she did actually say that she's already done as much as she can, or the Scottish Government has, by finding this extra £100 million to compensate businesses. But obviously she didn't go on to say this, but obviously that means that something else somewhere will not be happening because she's having to take that money away to provide this compensation.
Yes, we often say in politics it's not a zero-sum game, but when it comes to the Scottish budget, it is a zero-sum game. If you take 10,000 out of that, it doesn't come back again. Incidentally, on the £100 million package you referred to, Brian, I have the breakdown here. It's £66 million for eligible hospitality businesses, $20 million for the culture sector, $8 million for the food and drink supply chain, $3 million for the wedding sector, and $3 million for the worst affected businesses in the tourism sector. But clearly this money is going to have to be allocated carefully on need, and it's not a huge sum, but that the Scottish Government has made it clear as much as they can come up with now, unless there's any additional funding from UK. So we'll come back to that. Well, just finally on football, we were discussing this earlier on, and in fact the football isn't on the telly. At least it's not on free to view, so it's a pay view channel. So if anyone was thinking of maybe I'll not go to the game, maybe I'll just watch it on telly, you have to actually pay for it. So again, Scotland doesn't have any control over the what's on the free view and what isn't. So just finally on football, the First Minister was talking about really travelling to football in coaches. That's where it's most likely to be dangerous when you're actually inside that confined space. And so the advice there from, I forget if it was the First Minister or maybe the Chief Medical Officer said, or maybe both of them, but get a test first. Said if you do have to go on the bus, at least get a test and make that test as close as possible to your departure time. Don't rely on one that you did this morning. But if you do have to go on a supporters bus, the most important thing is to get a test and do not go near it if it proves positive. So that point
Yeah,
is on the
and
mind.
absolutely, that was one of the most interesting developments. This thing about a test a few hours later is worth taking if you're thinking about joining friends socialising. But you can. Is it maybe worth going back just to that £100 million that the Scottish Government, because that kind of raised a couple of interesting questions from journalists. If we have time. There was one question which said, what about this extra money that's been announced that is going to come?
The extra 220 million.
Yeah, which initially was 286 million. And then, so that was meant to be new money, and then we found out it wasn't new money. It's going to be taken out of a pot of money that's allocated for next year, so it's not new money. And the first figure that came out was 286, and then the Scottish Government went away and did a proper calculation and realised that it was only going to be 220 million, which is less than what the Westminster Government said it was going to be. So once again, it's well worth watching that the First Minister's briefing today, because her answers were very illuminating, and basically she said, "This is, again, her hands are tied when it comes to this kind of measure, and so it's well worth seeing."
Yes, and that's in fact, we will come to this later on, but the First Minister has actually arranged a meeting, presumably as an online meeting with Prime Minister Johnson today. You may remember the other day, the First Minister requested a meeting and that did not take place. I think the Scottish Government wanted a meeting 2 days ago. And of course, the Chancellor wasn't in the country at that time. But so as we recorded this show, because we recorded a couple of hours early tonight, in fact, and we're still waiting to hear if that meeting has started and what the outcome would be. But the First Minister, we assume, is making those points to Prime Minister Johnson right now as we speak. If we get that while we're still recording, we will give you that. Otherwise, it will be on the Full Scottish on Sunday. Right, thanks, Brian. So the phantom 220 million, that's not really there. Okay, so let's now move on to what the other parts of the UK are doing. It's useful, as Professor John Robertson discussed the other day, to look at Wales, what's happening in Northern Ireland. He was stressing how the coverage by the BBC particularly tends to be very anti-government in Scotland, but it isn't in the other countries of the UK. Let's have a quick look at what they're doing in Wales. 2 metre social distancing is going to be mandatory in offices, and measures to have one-way systems and physical barriers will be reintroduced to businesses, and that's from the 27th of December. Also, Wales, I hear today, is going to, what is it they're doing in nightclubs? Are they actually saying no nightclubs?
I believe
from
so.
After Hogmanay, I think, or after.
That was one of the questions
Christmas.
again today. They said, "Are you going to do the same thing as Wales and close the nightclubs?" So that implied that
Yes,
they are.
yes, they are going to close the nightclubs, but after the festive season. I can't
right.
remember exactly when that comes in. So in Scotland, of course, the businesses in general have to return to the kind of protections which were in place at the start of the pandemic to avoid crowding and table service in bars and restaurants. One-way systems again where possible. Face masks. Now, in England, face masks have been made compulsory in most indoor settings and public transport, as they have been all year in Scotland already. And we do note there seems to be the beginning of a gap in the rate of infection between Scotland and England. And Scotland has a lower rate of infection, and possibly that's partly because we've already been taking those measures. London particularly, well, the First Minister put it today that London is a bit ahead of the curve. Well, basically it means they've got more infections than we've got, but perhaps once these measures come in, perhaps that will begin to come down as well. Wales is also encouraging people to wear face coverings and to wash hands. By law, anyone over the age of 12 must wear face coverings indoors, unless exempt. Okay, going out, Brian, going out rules. New restrictions following the vote in the House of Commons this week is now mandatory for nightclubs and large venues to check the COVID status of visitors over 18. Again, we'll discuss that debate which took place in the House of Commons later on. That was on Tuesday. But nonetheless, the measure was passed that the passports are now in England. So it's bringing England into line with Scotland again, Brian. So England's playing catch up.
Yes, I think that there is a good chance that the reason that the numbers are lower in Scotland than in other parts of the UK probably is because we haven't discarded the measures as quickly as other parts of the UK. So we've probably got a bit of an advantage there. Did we do Northern Ireland and the differences there?
I'll come to Northern Ireland now. Yes, so Northern Ireland, people have to prove their COVID status to gain entry to a range of hospitality venues and large-scale events. That will be made mandatory for Northern Ireland. I don't have the date. Oh, incidentally, I've just found the date for Wales. They're going to bring in those measures and nightclubs closed. Nightclubs closed from the 27th of December. Excuse me, we're trying to deal with a lot of stuff has just come in. So Northern Ireland, those wishing to gain access to nightclubs, pubs, restaurants and other licensed premises will need to provide proof of vaccination, a negative lateral flow test or evidence of previous COVID infection. So that's the rule at the moment. Although, of course, Omicron evades both of those, both viruses, vaccines and previous infection.
It was another point well made, I thought, by the First Minister today when asked about the different measures in different devolved nations within the UK. And she used that to say that the fact that this is not Scotland or the Scottish Government politicising in the matter when they ask for these changes to come in and ask for more money from Westminster, because the Welsh Government and the Northern Ireland Assembly are asking for it also. And she made the point that the Northern Ireland's First Minister is basically a pro-union. So this has got nothing to do with whether you're independence-minded or whether you're a unionist. It really is about public health.
Yes, well, I think that's perfectly clear. Yeah, I mean, Mark Drakeford, Labour, of course, has come in from a lot of praise in the way they've organised the mitigations in Wales. Just finally, on the point of the other UK nations, working from home. England's guidance is that people should work from home if they can. In Wales, there will be a legal requirement from the 27th of December to work from home wherever possible. Obviously, some jobs can't be transferred home. And again, the Scottish Government has announced that allowing staff to work from home where possible will become a legal duty. That's from today. So a quick look around the EU, the UK, and we haven't got time to do the EU again just now. Oh, just finally, I better talk about care homes and other visiting settings. Care home residents in England will be allowed visits from a maximum of 3 named people over the Christmas period, and in Wales, the government is urging people to reduce contact with others, especially if Christmas plans include seeing older and more vulnerable people, so a general reduction. In Scotland, as we reported on Tuesday, the care home visits are limited to 2 households, so it's not a fixed number of people, it's more the spread from one household to another that the Scottish government is wanting to keep control over. So that's a quick look around what's happening in the other EU countries this week in dealing with Omicron. And just before, Brian, we move on to the next topic, I believe you were going to talk about what the First Minister had to say about how effective is COVID in the case of pregnant women. Should they take it? What's the effect on the women themselves and on the child?
Yes, so this is on a development from the JCVI, which I'm struggling to remember what
the Joint Council.
Now, back in April, I believe, they made a decision that it was safe, and they suggested that it was safe for pregnant women to get vaccinated. Now, I think at the time, I think it's pretty well known that if you have a vaccination for anything like measles or chickenpox or smallpox, and if you're pregnant and your body builds up antibodies, then those antibodies will pass to your child in the womb. So, in a sense, it's like a double vaccination. It's not protecting just one life; it's protecting 2 lives. So it's 2 for the price of 1. So that's been in place since April last year, that pregnant women should get the vaccination. It's safe for pregnant women. But just very recently, the JCVI have now said that over the Delta wave, if we call it the first, what we've gone through up until now, before the Omicron appeared, they've found now that there's been a 50% increase in the number of women who are pregnant who have either needed help with their respiration, which I think means if they've ended up in ICU, or they've perhaps suffered a stillbirth or some other kind of problem with their pregnancy. And those people, those figures have gone up by 50% more than usual, those kinds of problems. And it's believed that most of the pregnant women who did suffer those things, they were unvaccinated. So they're saying that really, if you don't want to risk problems during your pregnancy, you really should get vaccinated. And as I said, it's not just protecting you, it's protecting your unborn child.
Right, so again, the First Minister reiterated that, Brian, thanks. So for pregnant women, if you're in any confusion, no doubt about it, vaccination is effective, both for you and for the child. Okay, so let me just insert now, before we move on, I've just heard this afternoon, I just got this an hour ago, in fact, that the Scottish Government is announcing a new adult disability payment. And so the launch dates have been announced today. The Scottish Government's new benefit, the Adult Disability Payment, the ADP, will open for new applications in pilot areas from the 21st of March next year. Now, the pilot areas are Dundee City, Perth and Kinross, and the Western Isles. The new payment will be administered by Social Security Scotland, and it will replace the PIP, the Personal Independence Payment, and the Disability Living Allowance, the DLA, which are currently delivered by the UK Department of Work and Pensions. So further council areas will be announced in phases through next summer. So individuals with ongoing awards of PIP or DLA do not need to apply for the adult disability payment. The awards will be transferred automatically to the new Scottish system from August next year, with no break in your entitlement. Now, just further on that, Brian, the Social Security Secretary for Scotland, Ben Macpherson, said, the adult disability payment will be the 12th Scottish benefit to be delivered by the Scottish Government since we gained limited powers over Social Security and set up Social Security Scotland in 2018. The ADP will also be the most complex and large-scale Scottish benefit yet, reaching a forecast of up to 339,000 people once all entitlements are transferred from the DWP. We know that people have found applying for a DWP disability benefits stressful in the past. That's why we have listened to their experiences as we have designed a new system, and we are committed to doing things differently. We are introducing an improved application process, and in contrast to the DWP system, we are removing the burden from individuals to provide supporting information. The onus instead will be on Social Security Scotland to collect the information. And Ben Macpherson went on to say, importantly, we have abolished assessments in the form currently undertaken by the DWP. Instead, and only where required, we will hold person-centred consultations between the person and a Social Security Scotland health or social care practitioner, starting from a position of trust. Our consultations will not involve functional examinations. So quickly, Brian, this is we don't have much time to go into that in detail. That's just out today. But this part of the Scottish Government's to move away from what they see as overburdening, dominant state, kind of suspicious of people who are looking for benefits and saying this is your entitlement, and we'll talk to you in a reasonable way to work out what you need.
Yes, I think it's proof that the Scottish Government is delivering on some of its manifesto policies. They've always said that any powers that are given to them would be managed in a different way, a much more humane way. And so a lot of the problems that people have had with the DWP when they've been organising these things, things like assessments, have caused a lot of grief and heartache for the people that are applying for those benefits. So it's good news that this is something that is now under the control of the Scottish Government, and that they are managing it in a way that they said they would.
Okay,
So
so more people-centred and less unpleasant process for applying for that payment. And that comes in then from Dundee and those other areas from next March. Right, let's move on to our next topic. We're going to look at Brexit. There are two or three Brexit-related issues which have cropped up this week. One of those is about the new restrictions on van drivers' ability to drive in Europe. What's happening there, Brian?
yes, this is news that van drivers will be required to get new international operating licenses if they want to travel back and forth to the EU from May next year. And basically, this is one of these things where people think, oh, Brexit is done. Britain has left the European Union, and that is true. But there are still some things which have implications that have yet to affect us, and this is one of them. The Westminster government in the past, when it comes to this, has kept delaying changes because they're not ready to implement them. You know, things like if they did want to implement them straight away, it would have meant employing more vets to inspect cargo of meat or livestock that's travelling from Britain to the EU and vice versa, or meat products, phytosanitary rules they're called, and also they would just need more customs and excise staff simply on the day job. And then these checks are going to slow things down, which means that lorries coming out of the Eurotunnel or off a ferry at Dover, they need somewhere to park while these checks are made, and the whole thing is going to be slowed down. These have all been delayed and delayed and delayed by Westminster, but it looks like these changes are now going to have to start to take place from the 1st of January. But this is one that takes place in May 2022. And these new licenses for drivers are going to cost van drivers up to £1,100, which is a significant burden on small businesses, and it's going to, obviously that cost is going to be added to our costs that we're going to pay in the shops. There are a slew of other rules in the UK that are going to hit hauliers of all sizes, which need to be registered for, and customs controls will have to be applied for in both directions between the EU and Great Britain. Hauliers who do not have the paperwork will not be allowed to board a ferry or a shuttle, so there's a lot of vans perhaps are going to be making that journey and are going to get turned back at the last stage. And also there are 3 new sites being looked at in England to where all these lorries are going to be parked up. One at Bastion Point in Dover has just been agreed for the phytosanitary checks. A second border control post is being added to the existing HMRC facility at Sevington in Ashford, which is an enormous car park that was built on greenfield sites. And a third has been identified for Kent. By the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So this is all coming down the line. So as well as all the problems that we're suffering because of the virus, on top of that, we're going to have these factors kicking in generated from Brexit.
Yep, so being a third country, being outside of the single market, is causing problems and will cause further problems. Now, one of those, Brian, which has also come to us, this is in today's news, has been foreseen by the European Union. And in fact, we've heard today that the EU itself has decided to interrupt part of their Northern Ireland Protocol. In other words, the agreement which was made by Prime Minister Johnson, where Northern Ireland remains in the single market while the rest of the UK is outside it. And what's happened is a kind of a hybrid arrangement, of course, where some goods have to be checked before they can enter Northern Ireland, because that effectively means they've entered Europe. Now, the European Union has announced today that they foresaw difficulties with the supply of medicines. Maros Sefcovic, who's the European Commissioner in charge, has said that on his visit to Northern Ireland in September, he and other pharmaceutical firms foresaw that the Northern Ireland Protocol was going to mean that medicines which would be needed for cancer and COVID and other treatments could potentially be delayed at the docks while the paperwork was checked, as you were saying. So the European Union has taken the initiative, and Maros Sefcovic has said that when I was in Northern Ireland, I promised I would fix this, and he has looked into it. And the EU has announced today that there will be exemptions to Boris Johnson's Northern Ireland Protocol to allow these medicines to go through. So lighter red tape, lighter regulations to keep the supply of medicines in. So again, this is one of the trade barriers which Boris Johnson himself agreed to in his Brexit oven-ready deal, and Maros Sefcovic has actually volunteered an exception to that in order to keep the supply of medicines going.
Yeah, this is at the moment, Northern Ireland occupies a kind of a twilight state because it's still part of the United Kingdom, and yet it's still technically part of the European Union. And I think this is also related to the fact that at every stage, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said that there would be no border on the island of Ireland. And so that meant that the border had to go somewhere. So it's now in the Irish Sea, which makes trade between Britain, the mainland or the main island, and Northern Ireland that bit more difficult because there is a border down the Irish Sea, but there's technically no border between the north of Ireland and the south. So obviously trade is happening that way. But I think it's also come about on the back of, if you remember, there was that spat between Britain and the EU about vaccinations for COVID. There was a sticking point there with the situation that we ended up post Brexit. So it looks again like the EU has taken steps to iron out those wrinkles, which I think is just going to make trade between the north and the south, between Northern Ireland and the European Union, even smoother. So it's yes, I think that's going to be the outcome: is easier trade north-south and more difficult east-west.
And from north into Europe, we've got to remember Ireland is Europe now.
Yes.
If you get goods into Northern Ireland, you're in Europe. You have free circulation in Europe. So it's an exception being made to the Brexit rule. And of course, from the Scottish point of view, really that's what the Scottish government argued for when we said in 2016, was it Brexit? Yes, England has voted for Brexit, but Northern Ireland has not. So Northern Ireland is still in the EU.
Yeah, and
Scotland voted for the same thing, but that we can't get that exception here.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that probably Westminster could not stop the European Union making these changes. So again, that thing about Brexit taking back control of the borders and sovereignty, it's another example of that it's a loss of control and sovereignty because the EU is leading on this.
Somebody's got control. It's certainly not us. And just another point on that, of course, you were mentioning earlier on, Brian, that France can restrict the flow of people from UK into France because of the enhanced levels of COVID infection in the UK. So they can do that. So they have already the border controls they need.
Yeah,
and they are in the EU.
I think this is fascinating because again, we were told before in the run-up to Brexit, in the run-up to the referendum, we were told that we wanted to be able to control our borders, that we could not control our own borders as part of the European Union, that if we wanted to make a change to our border control, we could only do it with the consent of the European Union, or we'd have to be in line with the European Union. But France, with this development, because of the Omicron virus variant here in Britain, has said we're going to close our borders to people coming from Britain. We don't want British people bringing this virus into, more people bringing this virus into France. France has closed its borders independent of the EU. Its border with us in the UK. So it shows that, again, that we always could have controlled our borders in the EU if we had wanted to. We just chose not to, and France is doing that for itself now. Yeah,
that's another illustration. On the subject of EU borders, our next story, Brian, is the gathering worries about the situation with Ukraine and Russia. This is the eastern flank of the European Union. Of course, Ukraine would like to join the EU, and we've seen for several months now a build-up of military forces on the Russian side, thousands of troops gathering. And according to Ukraine, they think that there's going to be, they say there's enough troops gathering to have a prospective invasion in January. Now, of course, Russia denies any talk of an invasion. So what have you got on that, Brian? So the Ukraine, of course, in general, would like to join the EU. But of course, there's a significant Russian population which supported the previous president, looking to the east. So Ukraine is kind of split. Is it looking to the east or looking to the west? But they don't make that decision on their own, do they? The neighbour to the east is a player in that game.
Yeah, I think this is on the back of the recent talks between President Biden and Mr. Putin in Russia, which apparently were a lot longer than expected. So Russia has made these proposals which on the face of them sound reasonable and make Russia look as if they are offering to work with the EU. But when you read through the points that they're offering, they very often begin to read like things which would probably be a red line for the EU, and that they would not want to cross, or they would not want to, certainly not easily, not without something in return.
So what's Russia saying? Is Russia saying Ukraine may not join the EU?
There's a lot of talk about, yes, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of we're happy to do something with the EU and work with the EU, but only as long as Ukraine cannot join NATO, and perhaps only as long as NATO takes its troops back to the levels and the borders where they were in the 1990s. Meanwhile, I think Russia has said that they would expect that they should still be able to increase their troops on their border, on their side of the border. So and it sounds like I'm probably obsessed with Brexit, but it sounds very much like the kind of things that when Britain was negotiating with the EU, they would put things on the table and say, look, we're being very reasonable, we want to work with the EU, but what was put on the table were things that the EU could not stand. And so then when the EU said, no, we can't do that, we don't agree with that, that's against our main principles, then it makes the EU look as if they're being unreasonable. And it's as if Russia has learned that from, they've seen that happening in Brexit, and they're beginning to play the same kind of games.
Well, let's hope that the kind of threats that Russia is, appear to be making simply remain threats. Let's hope it will be negotiated. Yes, on the other hand, on one hand, the EU and Ukraine would like closer links, and of course Russia doesn't want that to happen, and they do have tens of thousands of troops as it persuades on the other side. So let's see how that goes. Let's hope they keep talking. If it's a return to the Cold War, well, Cold War is better than hot war.
Yes. What can I say? Well, it's like it wouldn't be ideal, but as you say, at least they're still talking.
Yep. Well, let's hope that continues. Now, let us talk about the big issue south of the border. Yesterday, in fact, maybe you woke up this morning quite early, like myself, Brian, eager to see the news from North Shropshire, which is a county I haven't visited much, really. Have you been there? But
I've probably passed through it on a train or a coach.
Well, we've been thinking about North Shropshire quite a lot. North Shropshire. Okay, so take about what happened in North Shropshire yesterday, Brian.
There was a by-election in North Shropshire yesterday, and this was on the back of Owen Paterson being forced to step down after he was found to have broken lots of rules about taking money for lobbying or people that were lobbying for his support. So he stepped down after Boris Johnson's attempts to save Owen Paterson failed, and that caused a by-election. And of course, timing-wise, it's been the worst timing because it came after all the revelations about Christmas parties in Downing Street. So it would seem that the people of North Shropshire who have voted Conservative every single year for the past 200 years or so, except for 2 years in 1904 and 1907, they've now decided that they would like to have not a Conservative MP representing them at Westminster, but a Lib Dem MP, which is maybe the natural choice considering the Lib Dems were in a coalition government in David Cameron's government. So perhaps they were always the ones that were most likely to get the Conservatives' second vote. And many people are seeing it as a message being sent by the voters of Shropshire to the Conservative government in Westminster after all the recent crises and scandals.
Well, it certainly is a massive switch to the Liberals because the Conservatives had a huge majority in North Shropshire. Didn't they? It was
a 32% swing, I believe.
Yeah, so they lost
Professor
tens
Curtis
of thousands of votes overnight.
Said. Yeah.
So one of the elements of that, no doubt, is the general disquiet about the Downing Street parties of last year. Now, we just also heard today that the person who's been put in charge of the inquiry into did that Downing Street party actually take place is Sir Simon Case, leading civil servant. We've also just heard from the news this afternoon, I just got this an hour ago, that Sir Simon Case himself held a party in his own office at around the same time, December last year. So the member Simon Case is a senior civil servant in charge of investigating the Downing Street parties, and he himself hosted a party in his office. But was it a party, Brian? there was a WhatsApp invitation, and there was Prosecco. So does that constitute a party?
Yeah, I recall there were questions in the House when we found out about these parties in Downing Street, and a lot of the questions that were asked of the cabinet or whichever minister was answering questions to the House. A lot of the questions centred around this person, Mr. Case, who is going to lead this investigation. Was he at the party in Downing Street, which was being investigated? And if he was, then surely he should be the last person who should lead an investigation into whether these parties happened or not. And every time the answer was that he was not at the parties, if there was a party, and if there was a party, he was not at the party. But perhaps what people were kind of angling at, maybe there were rumours which have turned out to be true, that he might not have been at the party in 10 Downing Street because he was throwing his own parties elsewhere. So what can I say? It's a tangled web of parties.
I've just to clarify, Brian, I've got it now. It wasn't actually a party, it was waiting room drinks. Okay, so let's move on now. I'm sure we'll hear more of that. Also in Westminster, we're looking back now to Tuesday's debate, which we alluded to earlier on, where the UK government, which in this case means the English government, were discussing bringing in Scottish-type COVID mitigations. In other words, bringing in passports to get into nightclubs and premises of that kind. There were 4 separate debates in the House of Commons, but the most contentious one was about the app, the passport app to get you into a nightclub. Now, as we reported the other day, a large number of Tory backbenchers decided to vote against the government, but the government's measure went through anyway on the support of Labour. Principally, Labour people and half of the Tories voted for it. I think 98 or 99 Tories voted against it. So the government's measure went through basically because of Keir Starmer's support. What caught your eye about who was for it? What was the lineup of people who voted for the basically bringing England into line with Scotland? Who was for that? Who was against it? And who couldn't they make their mind up?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I would say the first thing maybe that struck me was that, this isn't striking, this is routine. It's like in the old days when we had evil English votes against English laws, which meant that Scottish MPs could not vote again on matters solely to do with England, which was always kind of thought as being unfair, because quite often decisions made in England do have an impact in Scotland on Barnett consequentials and the like, but I must make sure that I don't get off topic here. So for a while there, the SNP MPs and any Labour MPs in Scotland, or even Tory MPs in Scotland, would not be allowed to vote on a vote like this when EVIL was in place. EVIL was dismantled, and now Scottish MPs at Westminster are allowed to vote on English matters. But the SNP have never, ever, they've always said that if it's an English matter, then we, on a moral issue, we just won't vote on it. And so the SNP stuck to that this time, and they didn't vote. The only Labour MP in Scotland, Ian Murray, he did vote on it, and I think I'm right in saying that he voted in line with Labour, and he voted for it.
Yes.
So it's also interesting to note that Scottish Conservative MPs, which would normally be quite keen to vote in favour of whatever the Westminster government wants them to vote for, this time they all abstained. So that was interesting, and of course those Conservative Scottish MPs includes our very own Douglas Ross, who has more than one job at the moment. 2 of those jobs are one is to be an MP at Westminster for Murray, and the other one is to be the head of the leader of the Conservative Party here in Scotland and at Holyrood as an MSP. So, although there was a debate in the Holyrood Chamber on the same day, which Douglas Ross did attend in person so that he could ask questions in the chamber in Holyrood, he could have, and that meant that he didn't attend Westminster to vote in the Westminster vote about these changes for vaccine passports. And at first that might seem, well, he can't be in 2 places at once, but technically he could have. This is getting really complicated. I hope you're still with me there at the back. So in Holyrood, you don't have to be in the chamber to vote, and you don't have to be in the chamber to take part in a debate. You can attend by Zoom. In Westminster, you can attend a debate by Zoom. You can go in remotely in some way, but to vote, you must be there in person. You have to actually physically walk into the lobby to have your vote counted. So what Douglas Ross could have done is he could have gone to London that day and voted, entered whichever lobby he wanted to, and then zoomed into Holyrood to still take part in the debate here in Scotland. But he decided to do it the other way around, which meant that he abstained in Westminster and decided to take up his...
Well, who knows why he did that? Maybe he made a calculation that's his best to avoid that controversy.
Yeah, but perhaps I've taken too much time to go into that. Perhaps the most interesting thing is the fact that there was a major rebellion of Conservative MPs. As you say, almost 99, 101 if you count the two people that did the counts. And the only reason that it passed was because Labour supported it. But they say they're doing it for public health and the greater good.
Yes, but and that's why Ian Murray, of course, voted really, if you like, to bring England into line with Scotland. I suppose the big story, though, the big question from that story of Boris Johnson losing the support of almost 100 MPs and then secondly losing the by-election yesterday. So the big story is, are the Conservatives going to decide that Johnson's time is up and it's time to look, well, everyone's talking about it today, who will be the next Prime Minister, who's going to be the next leader of the Tory party? That a lot of the papers are talking about that today. What do you think, Brian? Do you think they'll keep on going for a wee while and see if the first dies down into the new year?
Yeah, I don't think there'll be any major changes very soon, apart from the fact we've got the festive season. But I wonder if perhaps also the fact there's a new variant on the rampage. So I don't think there's going to be any canvassing or maybe campaigning in person. But perhaps more to the point, the odds on people taking over from Boris Johnson, I'm not a betting man, so I don't really understand these figures when they're quoted. But apparently the favourite to take over from Boris Johnson is the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. And in second place, but quite a bit behind, is Michael Gove. And then other people who were considered to be favourites, such as Liz Truss, are beginning to kind of drop way. You know, they're falling way behind in the odds. That's according to the betting offices. What do you call them? I don't know.
The bookies.
The bookies. That's the word I'm searching for.
However, the point is now it's really front page news discussing who will replace Boris Johnson. So we don't, of course, know whether he will go or whether he will stay on. But his leadership now is really the big talking point. He is seriously damaged, isn't he, by this week's events?
Yes, and again, I'm willing to be corrected, but I believe his popularity is slumped completely, and I think now Keir Starmer is more popular by a wee bit, and I think are Labour ahead in the polls slightly if there was to be a general election
several
tomorrow.
Polls have put Labour ahead.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think the same issues are affecting people in Scotland, because a similar poll in Scotland about Westminster voting intentions in Scotland showed that all the MPs at Westminster, if there was an election tomorrow, would be SNP. There would be no Liberal, Democrat, Conservative or Labour MPs if that was to happen. So it's having an effect up here as well. Okay,
well, the Johnson story, of course, that will continue into next year. We'll see whether he can re-establish his hold over the Conservative Party. He never, in fact, had a hold over Scotland anyway. So in a way, we're kind of spectators. It's up to what various groups of voters in England decide to do with their Conservative Party. Because the interesting thing, of course, is that in this union of ours, all four bits of it voted different ways. The Conservatives are big in England because of the Red Wall thing. Obviously, it's the SNP in Scotland. Plaid Cymru with an understanding with the Green Party of running Wales. And, of course, there are completely different parties in Northern Ireland. So basically, there's only one out of the four countries that votes Conservative. But the other three countries have to wait and see who they come up with. Sorry.
I think it's Labour that's in charge in Wales.
Yes, Labour. So did I not say that? Yeah, Labour along with, with an agreement with the Green Party. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. And the Plaid Cymru, the Plaid.
Yeah, they're key players there. Yeah.
Right, I better move on then. Confused myself last time. Now, as we started recording this afternoon's show, we heard today that the First Minister has again requested a meeting with the Prime Minister Johnson. And of course, she is making that point, as she did again today, that Scotland would like to have the opportunity to tell businesses, you've got to close now, you've got to send your staff home, you've got to not fill it with customers, so you might not be operating at a viable level. Even if you are open, you might not have enough people in it to pay your bills. Therefore, the Scottish Government wants to be able to give you the financial assistance to do that. Now, in fact, the SNP have today reminded us of the words of Professor Chris Whitty, the medical expert from London, and he was saying, really, I didn't realise earlier on that finance is the key to the whole thing. He says, the clinicians can advise people to do this, we can advise people to stay at home, but we didn't adequately realise that if people have got no money, they have to go to work. And so he's now said, it's one of those things that's obvious when you see it, but actually we hadn't seen how much that was driving things, and what he was talking about is finance. So he's pointed out this week, and the First Minister was quoting him favourably, saying, well, there's no point in us saying to businesses, this is what you should do. We also have to say, if that then costs you £10,000 a week, we've got compensation. But of course, the Scottish Government cannot raise its own money. Money in the UK is only raised by the Treasury. So that's why the First Minister was, presumably she's speaking to the Prime Minister now. And also I believe Rishi Sunak is flying back from California, where he had some business during the week. Go ahead, Brian. We don't know what the First Minister is saying today.
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to finding out how that talk between the First Minister and the Prime Minister goes, and hopefully with the Chancellor, Mr Sunak, in the room as well. It's interesting what the fact that the First Minister often goes back to people like Professor Whitty. She also has been referring to an answer he gave to a question at a committee in Westminster, where people said that if we follow these restrictions, these COVID restrictions, then as a result, diagnosis of people with cancer or people who suffer heart attacks or strokes are going to suffer because of the restrictions from COVID, and so therefore shouldn't we be more relaxed on the COVID front so that we can continue to help these people that are suffering cancer or strokes. And Whitty said, in line with the First Minister, said no, the opposite is true, because if we allow the virus to get out of control, then the NHS could fail, and then we would be much worse off than we already have been in the past. So if anything, it's the opposite. We've got to tackle COVID so that we can continue to do the best for people with serious conditions of other kinds. And I think that's also something that you said earlier on in the show today. You made reference to the fact that in Scotland, the new restrictions, although they're coming in place, we are allowed to visit relatives in care homes, whereas that was not the case in the first wave. And I think that's because they realised that that was perhaps something that was damaging and too restrictive. And now we have a vaccine, so they're saying, well, we'll let people into care homes, but in a controlled manner, and hopefully we can contain the virus that way. But now I realise that I've missed a point, which is about Mr Sunak and his. He has been in California, but now he's on his way back one day early. There's a lot of discussion out with Westminster about why he was in California, well, in Westminster as well. Questions have been asked in the House. His colleagues have all said that Mr Sunak is in America because he's there on business. He has meetings, but as far as I'm aware, they can't tell us who these meetings are with or what those meetings are about. And that really, instead of him being abroad, he could have carried out these meetings via Zoom, and then he would have been in the country now when people think that he's needed here to deal with what the First Minister is asking for. And the First Minister isn't the only person that's asking this. These calls are coming from the opposition in Westminster. So he's on his way back from, people suspect, from holiday rather than a business trip. So time will tell again, hopefully we'll find out what was going on there.
Yes, again, we don't know. You have actually been trying to find out this afternoon what exactly had these meetings, and you've drawn a blank. It's silence on it.
Another minister, Conservative Minister Penny Mordaunt, is in America at the moment, and she is there on business. And there are clips of her giving speeches to businessmen and women in America, but there's no such evidence of anything that Mr Sunak might be doing there in America at the moment. It's very quiet in that front.
Yeah, that's mysterious. Yeah, maybe we'll find out in due course. Still, we wonder what Well, I think we can guess what Chancellor Sunak will say if Nicola Sturgeon asks for another couple of million quid. I don't think he's inclined to do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because he didn't actually support the even the COVID measures on Tuesday. So he doesn't seem to be one of those who's in favour of either the government tightening the mitigations or extending the scheme, of course,
Yeah.
The furlough scheme, which he withdrew. The Scottish Government thought he withdrew it far too early. But really, the only way we can have something like that kind of business support re-established, is if Rishi Sunak agrees with it. But it doesn't look like he's going to be very likely to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that Conservative MPs that rebelled against the government in that vote, they weren't all just red wall Conservative MPs. They included MPs, members of Parliament, who are in the cabinet, people like Mr. Sunak. And again, it seems to be forming of this people that are maybe beginning to stand against Boris Johnson, I hesitate to say, and perhaps any future challenge to his leadership. There was something else that you mentioned in the run-up to me responding that I was going to say something to, and it's
well, we might run out of time anyway.
Okay.
The clock. We're trying to keep this to an hour. But actually, let me just clarify. Rishi Sunak didn't vote against. He wasn't there, presumably because
he abstained. Okay.
Well, he
right,
presumably was in California, and of course, as you said earlier on, the House of Commons doesn't allow remote voting.
Okay.
Although it'd be easy to do that. I think you can take part in questions in the House of Commons, but you have to physically have your carcass in the place in order to express your vote.
He could have paired with someone who would have stood in for him, but he didn't
used,
do
but
that.
that didn't happen.
Yeah.
There's just no vote. Yes, he didn't arrange a pair with anyone in the opposition. That's a deal they sometimes do, but that didn't happen. So there's just no vote for Rishi Sunak. Well, anyway, we're just speculating if he would help Nicola Sturgeon. Doesn't seem. I don't know. I was just wondering if the Prime Minister's weakness makes this a good time for Nicola Sturgeon to get on Zoom and say, "I think you need some help. You need some allies on your your side.
Yes.
Give us a few million quid and
yes, perhaps
win
there should
friends."
be a coalition with the SNP.
Sure.
What are the chances? But no, I suspect that you're right, Hugh. That Mr. Sunak, when that conversation takes place between him, the First Minister and the Prime Minister, I think he'll probably say, we have offered you already 268 open brackets, £220 million from next year's budget, and that should be enough.
Yes, I'm sure he will say that. In fact, if you like, chancellors are always hardwired to be tight with the money. There's supposed to be fiscal conservatism, if you like, with a small c. But maybe the Prime Minister might want to produce a smiling face, happy, cheerful Boris.
Yeah, it did come up at Prime Minister's questions when Ian Blackford asked about that for his question in PMQs, and the Prime Minister replied and said, Scotland has the power to raise taxes and you can pay for it that way.
Yeah,
but of course the tax is the only one that we have powers to raise is income tax. So he was suggesting that we use income tax to pay for the fight against COVID, which I really don't think would be enough.
Yep. So I know that. Well, we can't do that. We can't possibly replace furlough unless we doubled income tax. So I'm sure he knew perfectly well that's not a starter. So anyway, the Prime Minister, is obviously weakened this week, both by the Commons vote on Tuesday and by his frankly disastrous vote. Let's not beat about the bush. That was an awful day for Prime Minister Johnson yesterday. So let's hope Nicola Sturgeon can persuade him to spend some money today and really deal with this problem seriously. Our final story tonight takes us on to a completely different area about 5G activists. You can apparently, although we don't recommend you do this on Broadcasting Scotland, but apparently you can buy a quantum necklace or a quantum bracelet, and this preserves you against 5G rays, apparently. It doesn't do anything of the kind, actually. What is a quantum necklace anyway? Did you look at this one, Brian?
I think this is a good example of you have to pay attention, and when things like 5G masts and COVID are being linked and discussed and conspiracy.
Yes, because they have no connection whatever between them. It's complete hogwash.
This seems to be a product that you can buy, and apparently it contains actual radioactive material, which if you wear it around your neck in a pendant, then it will protect you against the malevolent signals that are emitted from 5G masts. And I think I'm pretty sure that I'm well aware of health and safety, that there's a red symbol which says to let you know that if something radioactive is in a container in a room, and it's to tell you to stay away.
Yep.
And you really, this is why rods from nuclear power stations are encased in concrete, and look what happened at Chernobyl. And yet they're saying, put this in contact with your skin and it will protect you from a mass.
Okay, so I think we're talking about, on the one hand, superstition and hearsay and rumour and nonsense about 5G. It's complete nonsense, by the way. And on the other hand, facts. If you wear something radioactive close to you for quite a long time, that will have an effect. In fact, what it does is it breaks down your DNA. In other words, it's killing you. So the EU has said, the Dutch government and the EU have said, do not put anything radioactive close to you, right? And the last thing you should do is wear these things all day. So people are actually buying something. People are selling these quantum necklaces which will do you harm, and they're doing it in order to protect you against something which isn't doing you any harm at all, which is a 5G radio mast. Now, the reason we bring this one up now, apart from the obviously health and safety message, no, do not wear radiation jewellery. We do not recommend that. But the EU is also saying that this is actually part of the misinformation, part of the rubbish that gets spread around about 5G. So this is one of the areas where the EU is saying, let's listen to people who know what they're talking about, listen to the scientists, and don't listen to some mad website somewhere, particularly if they try to sell you stuff.
Yes, and I think, there have been similar theories put about with any kind of like new technology that comes along. I think people were worried about ultrasonics and radio waves when they were used, but sometimes X-rays, you've got to be careful with them. MRI scans, you can only have a certain number of them. It's like, but again, these are similar. It's like they're controlled because, like radiation, it can be bad for you.
Yep, too much of it. Aye, obviously, high energy radiation. That's what the 5G is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But these things, the quantum jewellery actually does have high energy ionising
radiation. If it was good for you, there would be package tours to Chernobyl so that you can benefit from the rays.
Good point, yeah.
Whereas the opposite is true.
I would sign up for that one. Thanks, Brian. So that's just about it then for this evening. So that's from me, Hugh, Stewart, and from Brian Liddy. Thanks, Brian, for joining me. It's very good to have these discussions and fill out the topics. We will be back on Sunday with the full Scottish, and we have to apologise that we were not able to put the show out yesterday, and that just shows you how we're trying to operate with a very minimum number of volunteers, and really if somebody's off sick we haven't really got enough cover. So sorry we couldn't get the show out yesterday, but we have discussed some of those points today anyway. But going forward into the new year, though, we're asking for more support from you. Thank you very much if you are one of our subscribers already. And if you're not, then please consider subscribing, because the more money we get in, the more we'll be able to build up our team and expand the range of programmes, and hopefully we'll have more cover so we can continue we try to do the news 5 days a week plus Sunday, right? So if you can just subscribe for £5 a time, and really if we could double the numbers of our subscribers, we'd be able to employ a journalism graduate or an IE graduate full time, and we'll just be able to offer you more of a service, because Scotland needs independent broadcasting at this time. So thanks for watching anyway. Full Scottish on Sunday, but it's great to have you on board. So from Brian Liddy and myself, it's good night and see you later. Thanks.